Instead of focusing on winning arguments, we're teaching the basic fundamentals of sales and marketing and how we can use them to win in the world of politics, teaching you how to meet people where they're at on the issues they care about. Welcome to The Brian Nichols Show. Well, happy Thursday there, folks. Brian Nichols here on The Brian Nichols Show, and thank you for joining us on, of course, another fun-filled episode. I am, as always, your humble host, and today we have a 2-for-1 special. How about that? We have one returning guest and one new guest. And the returning guest, you know him as recently as last week because, folks, I heard nothing but good things in terms of Jacob Beckley and the Beckley Foundation. Everybody was ecstatic to hear about what he's doing over there with the Cure token. And now we're going to talk about the actual architecture behind it, Cure Chains. With that, Jim Nasr and Jacob Beckley is returning to the program. Jim, you're joining us here in the program. Gents, thanks for joining the program.
Thank you, Brian.
Yeah, thanks for having me back.
Absolutely. Thank you for returning to the program. And like I mentioned there in the intro, we are really excited because, number one, the audience loved our last conversation, Jacob, but they want to hear more. They want to learn more about how this works, how Cure Chain isn't just working from a cryptocurrency perspective, but it's actually going to be changing and revolutionizing the way that the healthcare industry really performs and acts across the board. So let's start off here. Jacob, the audience got the chance to get to know you last week, 2 weeks ago or so at this point. So how about this? Let's do a quick introduction for Jim to join the program. Jim, if you could, a quick bio and what brought you a part of this greater Cure Chain network team.
Sure. Thank you, Brian. I appreciate you, firstly, having me on board. Really pleased to connect with you and your audience. Really, my background, I am a software developer, technologist, architect, by profession. And then over the last many years, last 7-8 years, I've been largely focused in the healthcare space. I was at the CDC for a couple of years and led software development there. I was the chief software architect there. And then from there, I worked another couple of years in a clinical research organization and quite a bit of direct interaction in clinical research and working with mainly large scale pharmas. And then for the last 3 years or so, 2-3 years, really working with our own company called Acoer on building, essentially building technologies that, in this new lingo, use systems of truth, mainly blockchain technologies, to help be accountable, be transparent, and really help improve healthcare. And I think that's a real tie between kind of where my head is at and where Jacob is at, in that I think we both believe, and over the course of a number of conversations, this has been really echoed, that healthcare requires people like us who have a technological background, innovation background, to come in and really actually make some things happen. I think there are a lot of people who have good intentions, but not necessarily the right skills. And there are a lot of people who frankly front and don't necessarily, I guess, have a disincentive to really innovate because they make a lot of money the way things are. I kind of feel like perhaps this is where Jake and I have a lot of common ground, that we have a real kind of, energy and enthusiasm for actually making some things happen in the space. And I think our track record more or less proves that. So that's really where the segue comes in. Jake and I have spoken many times over the last 6-8 months about this. And I've been very pleased to see how, he has almost single-handedly kind of grown Cure Token. And really, as I mentioned, we're technologists. We have built a lot of software, and we think that there's a nice opportunity to bring our technology, our kind of wherewithal and skills, and map it to his vision.
I love it. And Jacob, let's maybe turn back towards the episode from last time, just as a refresher, because for the audience who's joining us maybe for the first time, Jim's identifying a lot of the problems that he's going to help solve. But what were those problems that you identified in the healthcare industry that you wanted to see solved?
Well, I think it's simple. The reality is, and I learned this from the pandemic, as I said, everyone knows now that I work in innovation. So I'm always dissecting problems and trying to figure out root causes and trying to figure out, what resonates and what works in order to craft something different through innovation and come out with something new. And what I discovered during the pandemic, and everybody realized it, it's that we were able to come out as a global resource, come out with a a vaccine very quickly, multiple vaccines, in fact. And it just happened differently. Everything kind of, all the handcuffs were taken off. And when you break that problem down into the root, I guess the enablers of that solution, it was broken down into access to data, being at the core, different than anything had done at a global scale like that. Also, researchers stopped working in these pockets and silos all throughout the world. You know, research, unfortunately, is done in vacuums a lot of times. Not all the time, but a lot of times. And, you know, there was also that incentive and motivation, you know, the motivation being, you know, I didn't want to die, you know, and we didn't know how bad this was going to be, or how the cascading effects, and we still don't know how long the cascading effects are going to be here. But by analyzing that and breaking it down and into those segments, it's quickly apparent that through the proper technology, proper use of technology, and you know, Jim touched on it, but on leveraging blockchain technology, we can enable that to occur in modern day research. You know, and that's the vision: is how can we enable research to move faster? You know, get the breakthroughs faster, be more efficient. You know, not like spin cycles and waste resources. And you know, I really believe that Cure Chain is one of the solutions, not the final end all be all, but it's one of the solutions that's going to help solve that problem. And I want to apply it to research first, and then we can see where it goes from there. But as everyone knows, my foundation has been focused on funding pediatric cancer research for many years. And you know, my background in technology, my background in innovation, the launch of Cure Token, and meeting up with Jim Nasr has just kind of enabled all of this to come together in just a perfect sort of storm, where I feel we're going to be able to truly innovate in a space it's really hard to innovate in.
Yeah, well, and one of the things I was going through and I was looking at some of the stuff that you guys have been looking at, and I would love, Jim, for you to dig into this idea of DLT anchoring, and this is going to be addressing one of the main problems that Jacob mentioned here, and that was the access to data and the fact that was so difficult, and how this is going to help solve that problem. Jim, could you dig into that a little bit?
Yeah, no doubt, Brian. So look, as Jake mentioned, the data that we deal with in healthcare research is siloed, is all over the place. So one of the underlying issues is, can you trust the data? Is it timely? Is it the latest data? Was it consented correctly? Is it authentic? All these questions are difficult to answer when you don't really know, when you don't fully control data. And I think we are long past the days of saying, let's just have one gigantic database, you name it, vendor of your choice, IBM, Oracle, whoever, you know, and let's just put everything inside their system and have one vendor of choice, Amazon, whoever, manage it. I think that's just never going to happen anymore, and for a lot of very good reasons. So I think the real question is, and this is really where Jake and I are very much in line, is to go and innovate into the future, you need to think interoperable data. So data is coming from different places. You don't necessarily control the source of data. So then the question is, well, how do you make sure that the data, as I was mentioning at the beginning, is authentic? Is you know, the person who touched it was actually allowed to touch it and did it in a way that was accountable. And that's really where this distributed ledger technology anchoring comes in. And it's very, very simply, we have the ability, especially if you implement it correctly. This is not, you know, a general statement, because if you don't implement it correctly, it may not be fast enough, it may not be affordable enough, it may not be usable enough. But I think it can be done, you know, in a way where all those things are met. But really what it amounts to is that when you, for instance, touch somebody's data, you record, at the same time, you record an immutable, essentially pointer, transaction reference on a public ledger that says XYZ entity in a privacy preserving manner, touch this data, and here's a consent that allowed him to do so. And sometimes that consent comes directly from an individual, like me. I'm providing my health profile, and a clinical researcher can look at it for inclusion in a clinical trial. So, and if that is truly being done, that individual can also be incentivized, could be remunerated in some shape or form. And that's really where I think we're getting to. We can essentially kind of promote a much more virtuous cycle for data usage and accountable kind of research in this way, as opposed to what it is now, which I think is much more of a vicious cycle and very much untrusted. And I can tell you from my own experience, even having dealt with it at a very large scale with federal government, where you think you know where the data is coming from. In most cases, you'd have to do a second, third, fourth revisit to the original data source of data to verify whether or not that data was legitimate or timely or the what was consented, and all of that makes it very inefficient.
Jacob, how easy will this make healthcare innovation and advancing in research in the future?
Oh, I believe it's going to completely flip it on its head. The system by which all of this occurs today is a very legacy process, very legacy workflow, very legacy system. I mean, more times than not, even today, researchers are spending most of their time filling out grant forms and applying for grants and all that. That's the end goal. Is let's get them out of that process so that they can do what they wanted to do. People go into research because they want to change the world. They want to find cures. They want to find breakthroughs. And Cure and Cure Chain, I think, is going to be the vehicle to enable that to occur. We're talking the tech side of things. We're talking, the onboarding of data and the incentivization from a economic perspective for both researchers and patients. But inevitably, the end goal here is to expedite how fast things can occur. So I think it's going to have just cascading effects throughout, not just research. I mean, that's again where things are starting. But I think the healthcare system in general. I think if we look at the problem differently and stop looking at it from a top-down approach and flip it on its head and say, how can we have a massive impact in our stake in healthcare? And that's through innovation, it's through community, but it's also through ownership of our information, our data, monetization potentially of our data. And, but as Jim says, it's about proving that data is authentic, that it's accurate, that there's consent, that data should be accessed. And the best part about the blockchain as well, and where I think blockchain technology is going to have a massive impact on healthcare, is that it is anonymized. It's not tied to Jacob Beckley. It's tied to, the idea of an individual. And there's other demographical information that we can append to this, health information, and it's just an extremely valuable resource. And the problem is that it's not accessible. You can't trust it, as Jim mentioned, but also people aren't incentivized to want to share it. And I think if people were incentivized to share their information, they would. And they also want the transparency of knowing how their information is being used. How is it being accessed? What research is it being utilized in? And by combining all of those sorts of things, there's a value chain throughout this entire ecosystem, which we can, I think, directly impact the effects of positive research and how fast and rapid those breakthroughs occur.
It's exciting stuff because, I mean, and you actually were going exactly where I was actually going to ask the next question about the privacy aspect, because I know that's going to be one question that's always going to get asked. And let's talk about the actual infrastructure, what this will look like, because it's great to talk about this from just the idea and how great it will be. And then everybody in the world of sales knows one of the hardest parts is helping make the solution real for the person. So let's make it real for your average person. What does this actually look like from a nuts to bolts standpoint, Jim? And I'll direct towards you because obviously you're going to have a much more deep dive approach here to the actual architecture.
Sure, Brian. And and to be honest with you, and this is really where I think Jake and I again see eye to eye. It's easy to talk about these concepts. They are kind of high T concepts, and they kind of resonate. But unless you can make it real, it's really not. It doesn't move any kind of a needle. In fact, it can be a reverse impact, and it can become jaded. So really, where we're at is that we have actually built a number of, if you like, modules or components of what Cure Chain looks like. In fact, many of them. As example, there's this idea of DLT anchoring that you mentioned, Brian. We've already built it at production. We've already done, I think, on the Hedera Hashgraph network, we've already done about 20 million production data stamps. So there's plenty of evidence that we can do it, and we can do it at scale. We can do it in different ways, through apps, through QR codes, through API calls. And in fact, but Jake and his team have already seen most of that. We have also, and we didn't necessarily talk about this, but I will mention it. We have also kind of figured out a very innovative and novel way of using non-fungible tokens to essentially show authenticity of consent or like a particular ownership of a data set. So not the NFTs that you hear about in context of content creators or music and JPEGs and things like this, but much more to its raw definition of a kind of a unique global reference, if you like, token, which is really just a set of numbers they can use to then point to any kind of digital asset. And we have built this technology called Rice Hash that allows us to very, very quickly and extremely cheaply and at a large scale associate NFTs to consent, to data sets and things like this. And really the net of it, and this is a word that we kicked around quite a bit with Jake and the team on Mondays, is the idea that we can get to demonstrability very, very quickly because a lot of this infrastructure, a lot of tools are already built. You know, what needs to be kind of essentially tailored together is a context. There's some elements around tokenization that we still have to work through, but much of this is already proven technology that's working in other areas and other pods. So our whole thinking is, look, just like I was mentioning in the beginning in terms of data interoperability, you don't need to go back to point zero to do really useful things. It's much better for us to say, how do we repurpose some of this open technologies, open APIs, open source things that people have built that are best practice, and then just assemble them correctly and put them in the right business models. And that's really it. To be honest with you, this is the direction. We feel very confident that at least for the near time frame, near being kind of thought of in 6 to 12 months, that much of what we need is already there. We have already figured out an infrastructure that, again, Jake and team have seen that uses multiple cloud infrastructure. So all three of the big ones, Amazon, Google, and Microsoft Azure, in a multi-cloud deployment, very, very seamlessly. We do a lot of work around privacy preservation of data that goes on the ledger. Again, Jake and team have seen this, where we do one-way pseudonymization of data that goes on the ledger, and lots of other details that I don't necessarily need to go to at this moment. But all to say, a lot of this really has been done in other contexts with other clients. And so we're excited to kind of bring it together and really kind of drive this idea of CureChain being something that becomes hopefully a standard, if not the standard for clinical research.
That's so cool. Like the fact that 6 to 12 months is a realistic timeline is like one of the most exciting things I could think about, because that's like that's not one of those, pie in the sky visionary goals. This is like a realistic, this could happen this year or next year. And that's pretty darn cool. So let's get people excited, because I'm sure there are going to be people out there who want to get involved. So if you're in the clinical research world, or if you're in the healthcare industry and you're trying to figure out a way that you can get involved with the CureChain, Jacob, how can folks go about doing that?
Well, today the easiest way is just reach out to me. I'm totally accessible, but you can find a little bit of information at curetoken.com. or at the beckleyfoundation.org, which is the foundation aspect. But we're currently in development of, kind of a few key areas. The websites, to provide more information and literature. We're going to be producing a white paper, which will be a very thorough explanation of how this is coming to life. And as Jim mentioned, the demonstrability of this, we are working, we're working to make this happen pretty fast. And get it to the point where we can start demoing it, start ingesting data, start seeing how researchers can utilize this and what we need to pivot on. This idea is going to evolve. This is not an idea that is baked. This is going to iterate, and there's going to be an evolution to it. But there's tons of ways that they can learn about it. But obviously, reaching out to us is going to be the easiest.
So when I'm in the world of sales, we lay out everything that looks great, but then there's also things that we have to be aware of that are going to hold us back. So I'll just jump ball here, and I'm not sure who wants to take this question, but what do you foresee being the biggest roadblocks to getting this in action?
I don't know. That's a good question, because in the innovation process, those are the things you tackle first. The hardest things. And as Jim mentioned, this has been proven. In other contexts, he's proven it. So it's a matter of reassembling. In a different type of context and structure. But the reality is, from a technology standpoint, there really isn't anything that isn't possible that we need to worry about that is going to prevent us or be a barrier. Once we get further along, there may be things more around compliance, more around government regulations, healthcare regulations. But Jim has a lot of experience in that, and we're also assembling a team of people who have a lot more experience than both of us, both on the research side as well as just compliance. So at this point, I think time is probably our biggest barrier. We want to move fast, but as far as feasibility, I think we've seen it. I've seen it. This is truly within our reach and within our grasp, and we're going to get there as fast as we can.
It's exciting stuff. Jim, anything you want to add in terms of the overall architecture, the infrastructure that is CureChain?
Yeah, what I would say is we are, and really this is our business, but Jake is also fully kind of on board with this. We are building technologies that really from by design are secure, privacy preserving, and scale. And those are not easy things. I mean, they're very easy to say. Don't get me wrong. Anyone can say it. They're not easy to build. They're not easy to build in a way that becomes a repeatable process. But that's really where we differentiate ourselves. That's my background. Again, having built a lot of these very big systems, but with that kind of a mindset, with the compliance mindset. Jake mentioned compliance as example. We are fully aware of, for instance, HIPAA compliance and the PHI, PII kind of restrictions that they have, how to anonymize data. I was mentioning how we pseudonymize data goes on the ledger, but we're also aware of, for instance, the general data protection regulations in Europe, which protect individuals' rights. In fact, part of our product Rights Hatch is very much built around this idea. We're aware of, for instance, what's going on in California with what's called the CCPA, California Consumer Protection Act, and many other ones, many other rules and regulations that are kind of coming on, which are really good because essentially the gist of them is to protect the individual's rights. And if you, I know, Brian, you know this already, and certainly Jake does, that this whole movement towards Web 3.0 is really partially to do with empowering the individual. So it's very much part of our thinking, this idea of building things that ultimately help the individual and their rights, and we don't become another intermediary, right? So a lot of our thinking is, even at the low level of technology, is not to build things that become white elephants and silo technologies, because just because you call it a blockchain enable something, that's just a sexier label for a bad solution if it's not interoperable. So a lot of those things go through our head, and those are the kind of things that I think make me excited about the future of this.
It's all exciting stuff, honestly. Like the future is truly, it's going to just be awesome. And I know I like everybody looks around and it's so easy to just, doom and gloom, but the things that are being done behind the scenes, there's so much to look forward to in terms of the technological advancements and what that's going to be able to do for society. I mean, if we are able to solve the problems we see in healthcare in a fraction of the time, just think about the time, the energy, the effort that can be spent, and also the resources in other areas versus the prolonged and in many cases siloed activities. It is truly going to be a different world, a different future for healthcare. And hey, we have two of the most instrumental pieces here in that movement with Jim and Jacob joining us. So with that being said, folks, please do us a solid and make sure you support the amazing work that they are doing over at the CureChain, but also over at the Beckley Foundation. Jacob, where can folks go ahead and support the Beckley Foundation and find you?
They can go to the beckleyfoundation.org. We are a nonprofit organization. We do provide grants as well. So come there if you're interested in know any families that need support, financial support, who are going through some struggles with pediatric cancer. We'd be happy and privileged to be able to support them.
And obviously, double check the episode from last week or so. I'll make sure I put that link in the show notes as well, because it was a great deep dive into exactly what you're doing there for helping fighting pediatric cancer. Jim, where can folks go ahead and find you if they want to continue the conversation?
Yeah, certainly. I'm also quite easily accessible. I'm on Twitter at JNasr, JNASR. Our website is acoer.com, ACOER. I'm on LinkedIn. Happy to connect with folks. And yeah, certainly I think both Jacob and I really kind of believe in the mission behind this. So, hopefully that's echoed in how we present ourselves.
Gentlemen, thank you so much for an awesome conversation. Folks, please, if you enjoyed today's episode, I'm going to ask you to do me a solid. Go ahead and give it a share. And when you do, please give these two fine gents a tag, and also give yours truly a tag as well at B Nichols Liberty. With that being said, it's Brian Nichols signing off here on the Brian Nichols Show for Jacob Beckley and Jim Nasr. We'll see you tomorrow.
Listening to the Brian Nichols Show. Find more episodes at briannicholsshow.com.